Yeah. Thank you. So good afternoon, welcome back. Well, actually, you won't find my name on the program, right? It should be Shirley Wang, Dr. Shirley Wang. Well, actually, Shirley has got another engagement, so she'll be back, okay, after tea break. So even though we may not have what we call the collaborative collection management among JULAC yet, but we do have very collaborative directors. And we back up each other, so here I am. Okay, as mentioned by the MC, the theme of this section is centralizing collection management and technical services inevitable or avoidable. So in this section, speaker will address the nature of collaborative consortial arrangements from a technical services and collection management point of view. Now, in this section, we are very glad to have Dr. Elliott Shaw, okay, to be our keynote speaker. Dr. Shaw is a historian, a librarian, and a technical information technologist, right? He's now the executive director of the Association of Research Libraries and a nonprofit organization of 125 research libraries in the US and Canada. And prior to his current appointment, Dr. Shaw was the director of libraries, professor of history, and chief information officer of Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania. Right? He has also taught history and library science at various colleges and universities, including the University of Illinois, the New School for Social Research, University of Cologne, and Rutgers University, my own university. And also has published extensively in the history of advertising, of publishing, on radicalism, of German America, and of restaurants. So Dr. Shaw's topic of presentation today is the role of library in the world of information. Please welcome Dr. Shaw.
We figured out that we didn't overlap at Rutgers, so you were very lucky you didn't have to take a course from me. I'd like to thank a number of people for the opportunity to be here with you today. Back in Hong Kong, after an absence of almost 30 years, my heartiest thank you is to Diane Perushek, a friend and colleague of many years. We were trying to figure out exactly how many years, stretching back to the time when we both worked in Princeton, she at the Guest Oriental Library at the university, and I was at the Institute for Advanced Study. People asked, what's the Institute for Advanced Study? And I said, that's where Albert Einstein was. So that's where I was. Not when he was there, though. She and I shared our love of Chinese culture and food as we joked about how I owned the collection that made up the core of her library. And I'd be happy to explain this at more length in the period for questions at the end of my talk. I also want to thank the organizers of this event, particularly Linda Lee, who kept us all moving and going, especially those of us who were overseas, and all of the marvelous people that I've met here during the last 2 days. It's really been a privilege and an honor to be here. I want to speak only for about 25 minutes, maybe 30 minutes at the most, and I'd like us to try to have a conversation at the end. I would like to ask you some questions, as well as you asking me some questions, and I've asked our moderator to throw something at me if I go on too long. So as you heard, I'm a historian, I'm a librarian, I'm an information technologist. Now I sort of run a big consortium, in a way, of libraries. But what's most important for me, I think, in all of those is the fact that I am a historian. I think about things in historical ways. And I've been going around the United States and Canada visiting as many of the libraries that I possibly could that make up the core of the Association of Research Libraries. So there are 125. I've been at 32 so far after 5 months, and I don't know if I'll ever make it to all 125, but I hope to. And it's being a historian, I think, that that really informs much of what I do and have done in all the roles that I played in my career. So please bear with me as I set out a linked series of arguments that have at their core the notion that how we are acting and reacting now to what we experience in the world of information we currently inhabit is deeply and inexorably rooted in the past. Specifically, our current practices and habits of thought derive from a period of human history whose very foundations are now crumbling, but which has touched almost all of the cultures on the planet. Most of my examples will come from the West, but I would argue that the thinking in the East and in the West about libraries is not that different. These old habits of thought continue to be paramount in our decision-making processes. An example, just this morning, who owns that book? Do we own the book or do you own the book? A legal system says you have to say who owns the book. Do we really care if we own the book or not? Do we care if we have access to the book? In some cases, wouldn't it be better if we didn't own the book? It would be a lot cheaper. For all of those kinds of questions that we heard this morning go back to a certain notion about the way the world was organized a long time ago and has stopped being organized that way, but the way we think about these questions. And by the way, we're not alone. This isn't just a library problem, but we're talking about libraries today, and I think we need to think about that carefully. And I would argue that the library is the institution that bears the deepest marks of the thinking of the last century and a half. So even though it's a shared problem, I think we have a worse case of it than other people do. It's my firm belief that if we understand our own habits of mind better, we may be in a better position to make choices among a seemingly infinite number of options that are before us. The dilemmas we are now facing and the way we characterize them, the name of this panel, centralizing or decentralizing, or the way we distinguish between them, collection management as opposed to technical services, have very much to do with the origins of the modern research library and its growth and development in the period that many people call the age of modernity. It was a time when many thought that the increasingly complex world that was emerging in the mid to late 19th century could be managed through reducing each problem to discrete parts and tasks. The separation of spaces into distinct work areas, the development of office furniture, library stacks, file drawers, filing cabinets were all closely linked to the development of modern corporate techniques of classifying information and sorting out tasks. So the birth of the silos that we often bemoan in our libraries, our universities, and other parts of our world seems to have begun in a moment when we thought we could build a universal library, a vast research university, a giant corporation, a powerful nation state, by breaking up the work into discrete, separate tasks. The reason I think this all matters is that the legacy of that founding moment is deeply ingrained in the profession we call librarianship, the buildings we inhabit, and the habits of mind that inform our thinking and our actions, and perhaps can be seen most clearly in the legacy of our organizational structures. One of the key assumptions that lies at the root of this conception of the world is that knowledge and expertise and the research products on which it is built are also discrete and finished, built up slowly, preserved and maintained by experts with technical training in various sub-duties and disciplines. Historians like to think in terms of continuity and change, and look for the causes of change that lead to ruptures in existing cultures and describe how these moments expose the assumptions behind the older structure. It seems that the penetration of dynamic, changeable nature of digital web-based linked information technologies to universities and research libraries has shown the fissures and exposed the assumptions in some of the fixed structures into which we have organized ourselves and how we think about our work. where research products were once discrete entities, a book, which we thought we knew how to organize and store, they are now fluid and malleable. Where information used to reside within the grand buildings we call home, it now seems to be ubiquitous. Before, we thought we could provide training through one shared professional program to prepare us for the discrete tasks we would take on. Now we must address a variety of ever-changing responsibilities that require a diverse set of people, skills, and preparations. Then a hierarchical and rigid system of departments dedicated to specific tasks help make our work straightforward. Now it can stand in the way of innovation and agility. I contend that these old ways of thinking inhere in how we tackle new problems, but that we can find a middle ground. In other words, it's not either this or that. A space in which we can weigh our older ideas of order against the new realities we face. This dilemma, which can often take the form of such binary oppositions as centralization and decentralization, control and openness, fixed and shifting categories, seem most powerfully illuminated at the moments when we think we can build a universal library. And let me just run through a couple of thoughts about that. There are essentially three moments in the last 150 years where we thought we could build a universal library. One was in the middle of the 19th century. You see an example of that universal library on the left. Another one was, just skip forward a little bit, right after World War I, towards World War II, when H.G. Wells, I knew him as a science fiction writer, had this notion of the world brain, which if you read this closely, it's a fascinating kind of idea. You get this sense that he was going to organize not just books, but all kinds of other things in an interconnected, supranational way that would lead us towards a universal library. We have the other piece of the universal library. If I go back to that quote from Vannevar Bush, the guy who essentially invents the hyperlink at the end of World War II. Then we have another moment of belief in the 1990s that we could create a universal library. There are all kinds of statements from IFLA in the early 1990s of how we were going to build a universal library together. We had this new technology that we were going to be able to use that was going to make it possible for us to pull this off. So when this moment comes, it seems to me, is the moment that I was talking about before as a historian, the moment of disruption. Because it seems to me the biggest disruption with the coming of something like Google is the notion that we have lost control. And it seems to me the most important word that I learned in library school, and probably you learned in the same library school. I actually went to a different one. They wouldn't let me teach there, so I came to Rutgers. That word that we always heard was bibliographic control. Right? We were going to control the world of information. Not only, it seems to me, have we lost control of the fact that we no longer are the center of the information universe. It all used to be in our grasp or in our walls. But we've even lost control in many ways of describing some of the things that are in that information universe. Many, many attempts to try to fix ourselves, fix in place some of the creations of, that are malleable and fluid. We don't know where they are necessarily. They're moving away from us. So the possibility that libraries could play the role of making everything available to everyone, as we all know, died quite quickly. The sense of being at sea, the loss of control, bibliographic control, or almost any other kind of control that the library world might exert on the notion of the universal library, and the commercial world, and this is, I think, the key for us. We haven't talked that much about the commercial world in the last day and a half. Move into the world where libraries thought they held sway was rapid and jolting. Now, As I said before, first of all, this is not a doomsday scenario, nor do I think we are alone in this, nor do I think that this should be a surprise to anybody. But the possibility that libraries, this loss of control by librarians of the discourse of information mimics, for example, the loss of other professions of the areas they used to control, or used to think they did. The first analog that comes to mind is the medical profession, whose sway over health care, at least in the United States, has also been ceded to commercial interests, the so-called health providers of the insurance industry. There have been many powerful voices raised in the library community wanting to reassert a kind of control. I think we are hearing them here, and we are hearing them everywhere. The arguments veer back and forth, and this goes to the topic of our session, from the way the local library, between centralization and decentralization, from the way the local library works internally, to the role of consortia, to the role of cultural dominance. For example, one of the issues around Google, at least in France, was it was asserting a United States-centric cultural dominance, and that had to be struggled against by a nation state, also a creation of this age of modernity, by pushing back and searching for non-commercial control in order to push against American dominance. One of the things that we've been hearing about in the last 2 days is a decentralized model, one being embraced by commons-based consortia like the Digital Public Library of America that Lane mentioned. There's something called the Smithsonian Commons, something like Wikipedia, that there could be, if there can't be a total control and a creation of the Universal Library by libraries, then there are places where we can assert ourselves and create versions of universal libraries or versions of control over the world of information. This is an example. Deanna Markham had talked about the fact that, in Europe there are people who are trying to build overarching centralized systems because they have funding for that. We learned about Callus yesterday, where there's centralized funding from an enormously wealthy country to be able to get control over the Chinese language materials. In a place like the United States, there is no centralized funding to pull that off. It's done in a decentralized way. But we're still with the centralized, decentralized dichotomy. Now, I'd like to argue for what the middle ground could possibly look like, and where it can be found, and how we can make local decisions that are sound, that we can rely on, and that work for the medium term. One of the other things that one has to think about in sense of modernity, and if you think about some of your strategic plans, strategic plan that says you're going to be here this year, and in 3 years you're going to be here, there's an assumption there that you know what the future is going to look like, and you're going to map a strategy to get there. Well, we know we don't know what the future is going to look like, but we still make strategic plans as if we think we know where we're going to go. And I would like to argue that we have to think about the medium term, and we can't think about exactly where we want to go, but maybe that there's some kind of path to something, some kind of goal. And here I want to turn to the work of Chuck Henry. Some of you know him, Charles Henry at Council of Library and Information Resources, who's tried to put together a group of people to put together the centralized and the decentralized answers to the kinds of questions that we're working on. There's one of the unfortunate things about librarianship, I think, is sometimes we don't do well with titles, and this is a good example of it. This committee is called, if you bear with me, the Committee on Coherence at scale in higher education. Okay, so what CUHK is trying to get out here is there are pieces of an answer to where we need to go all over the place. We've heard over and over again the last day and a half that, well, consortia can be overlapping. Some of the things we do, they do too. I hear this from ARL library directors. Well, I'm on 16 different boards. I'm not making this up. Running different kinds of projects or in different kinds of consortia. It does take up a lot of my time, and I'm not sure where I should put my energies. If you take a look at this list of people, you'll see some of the names of things that we've been talking about. Here's the president of the DPLA. Here's Paul Courant, who did all those economic studies that we talked about. Here's the president of CLEAR. Here's the head of EDUCAUSE, so we have the technology people there. Here's the president of a major university. There's me for some reason. There are all kinds of other people here who are we're essentially saying, you know what, there's a problem here that we've got to fix because we have all tried to figure out our own answers to a very difficult puzzle. And we wonder if we haven't gotten to a place where maybe there are some solutions that are out there that should in fact be supported. So let me talk a little bit about what the kinds of things we're talking about that we hope will work. So the notion here in this coherence at scale idea is that we need different kinds of solutions. And let me explain why I think we're at a moment that we think this could happen. So let me read this to you. How is this different from the ways in which the universal library has been characterized in the past? So here's a group of people drawn from all over the place who are going to now solve our problems for us. How does this match up against the centralized and decentralized solutions to the problems that we face? And more specifically to the question before this session, how does it illuminate the question of centralizing collection management and technical services? These three questions may be the key ones for all of us to face, and not just those relating to collection management and technical services. Let me sketch out where I see the possibilities are in this new formulation. The answer here is, I think, in a word called holistically. It harkens back to the historical argument I was making at the outset of this address. If you accept that the notion that the ways we have been thinking about the library are rooted in 19th century conceptions, then one could argue that the answers we have turned to in the past are no longer appropriate. Distinct departments, notions of control based on the need to keep things local in inventory, distinguishing between such processes as collection management and technical services. These inherited configurations start to lose meaning in the world that calls out for answers that go well beyond the organizational structures we put in place in our libraries. As projects mature, and here I want to spend some time on just one of those projects, the Hathi Trust, we've heard about, especially again from Lane, is a fascinating example. What is embodied in them that all, and I repeat here, and I mean all of the categories of the old library wrapped up together, from collection management to technical services to reader services and public services. If you think about the Hathi Trust, it's not a collection per se, it's actually an engine for creating new scholarship. So it doesn't fit the technical services, public services, collection management, storage issues. It's all of those things in one, making the distinction between technical services and public services start to look like a relic of the 20th century. So it's essentially built capabilities into itself, right? It is no longer a discrete set of pieces that we're working with. We're working this way, not this way. Let me quote from some of the press releases that just came out about a month ago, I think. The one you're looking at here, all of us at Indiana University and the University of Illinois who have been working towards this release can be proud of enabling a first round of shared computational tools for the HathiTrust corpus. So you have the HathiTrust corpus, but now you have the tools to use them built into it. A professor at the University of Illinois, this represents a major step forward in understanding how new knowledge can be derived from one of the largest digital library collections in the world. He's talking about new knowledge. He's not necessarily worried so much about the collection. He's worried about how to create new knowledge. And Lane was quoted as saying, this is a significant step forward in making the HathiTrust digital collection a valued source for creating new scholarship. So what we see in this trio of statements is a significant leap from the assumptions inherent in theme 4 of this conference. Let's start again with Lane. A significant step forward in creating new scholarship. What she is suggesting here is that we now not only have a collection, but also inherent in the collection, a set of tools that facilitates new kinds of research. I hope you can see with me how this kind of transformative thinking, so getting beyond the 19th century pieces, moving to a 21st century holistic way of thinking things, that the materials and the tools to understand them are now bundled together, should force us to rethink the organizational structures we've inherited, the categories in which we think, the limits of our ability to exert bibliographic control within our own walls. Another example of this, and I won't read this to you, but another example of this is linked data environments. And in linked data environments, you have the same kind of convergence. We go beyond the notion of a collection that's housed somewhere in a discrete location towards thinking about how to connect us all in a web that facilitates sophisticated research. We could multiply the examples, but they all point in one direction. The answers to the age-old question of the universal library, if it's still an attainable idea, do not lie in our own institutional precincts, but call for systemic global change. The barriers to the realization of this utopian ideal, though, are no less formidable than they were in the past. Because it's not just the nonprofit world that lives in the 19th century. The for-profit world lives in that same place. Any of you who've had to pay an invoice recently understand that. They may in fact be more difficult to overcome as economic nationalism and monopoly frameworks, also constructs of the 19th century, vie to place limits on the scholarly use of information in their striving for profit. Chuck Henry notes organizational, industry, academic, social, and language constraints towards the realization of a holistic approach to a world in which the objects of research library attention are malleable, reside elsewhere, and are difficult to bend towards interoperable. Was that monopoly capitalism doing that? Or I won't finish that sentence then. So we have, I'm going to finish up in a couple of minutes. We have libraries, because I'm afraid of this thing. We have libraries to run right now. Okay, this is a wonderful idea that I'm talking about. And as our able panelists who come after me will help us think through in a moment, how do we work with the current issues that we're dealing with? But I would suggest that we need solutions to the questions that faces the work now and work later. So I would urge all of us to build towards the future while we maintain those systems that are still necessary to the flawless functioning of our already complex operations. So if you need to build a storage center, you start to need to think about how do you build it in a way that will work in a world that's changing instead of the way that it may have worked in the 20th century. So I want to end my remarks today by reminding you of what I said at the beginning about myself and see if I can apply it to all of us. You may recall that I said I was mostly a historian, but also a librarian, a technologist, and the director of a library association. If I have been successful in convincing you of anything that I said, let it be this. If we can understand, appreciate, and then overcome, where necessary, the ways we think about our work that are legacies of another time, then we won't have to say that we have split personalities, which function differently depending upon which department we work in, what the official job description might say, or where we sit in the hierarchy. Rather, we might imagine our whole selves, so the yin and yang may be no longer the yin and yang, but sort of just one little baseball, I guess, as people who have the talent and ability to think us through to a place where the whole is not the sum of the parts, but the beginning of the next chapter. So here I want to flip the classroom. I have some questions that I thought you might want to ask yourselves after this presentation. And I thought this is what I thought the questions might be, but I'm hoping that you'll think of better questions or have other ideas to share. So we have almost 20 minutes to do this. So I had as the overarching question, how can the research library emerge from its 19th century cultural traditions to realize the benefits of coherence at scale, of putting the parts together, choosing those parts, and making them work together. And then I had 3 specific questions. And this is the question I always ask my staff every year, and every time I ask them what we can no longer do, they would add 10 more things that we not only had to do, but we couldn't get rid of. Is there a way to consolidate the overlapping and multiplying number and nature of consortia? I would love to hear from you what you think about that. That would help me, and I think help all of us. And what is the unique role of the individual library in this world of overlapping consortia and interrelated work? So there are a couple of microphones somewhere, I believe, and I will wait for questions. You got it. I covered a lot. Or comments.
Thank you, Elliott. That was brilliant, and I'm still kind of reeling from it. I don't really know where to start. My name's Colin Story. I'm of no fixed abode now. But anyway, just looking at the questions, 1 and 3, for instance, the local library and the individual library. You know, it seems to me that we're all struggling with the events on a world scale, with the commercialization of education, as you indicated, and the jolting of commercialization into our own small world of libraries, which we are distinctly unhappy with, I think. I certainly am. You know, that a company can start and become such a world force as Google, with a motto saying "Don't be evil," which means that they probably are evil. Why would they even say it? This I think is distinctly unsettling. But in the day-to-day management of what we're trying to do, in trying to look 3, 5, 8 years ahead, trying to think holistically, we still have to manage our own local individual library and tune it to the individual desires and wishes of our own community, and respond as well and react to the way that community views us in a 19th century way. A librarian, certainly in my experience, a librarian is seen in a particular pigeonhole, and it is very difficult to climb out of that pigeonhole or to knock the hole to make it bigger or a different shape. And so I suppose I'm just commenting that I think we would understand what you're trying to get at here, but just how far we can move it on a day-to-day basis, on a year-by-year basis, is something we're all struggling with. And, you know, I can only wish the profession, or a range of professions or a changed profession, luck in the future in sorting this out, because it's such a challenge.
Thank you for sharing that. That's, while we're waiting for a next question, there are historical examples that are also useful as future examples, the back to the future kind of example. And one of them is also in the 19th century. The research library that came to the United States came from Germany, and it was essentially built around the library. And these were research institutes which had a collection. But the words in German are quite interesting. The faculty was everybody. It was the students, the professors, and the people who worked in the institute. And they all shared in the production of knowledge around the library. There are some glimmerings of those things in some universities who are rethinking how education happens, like project-based learning. Essentially, we're all in it together, we're all learning together. So there are some answers from the past that are actually starting to shine some light on what you were just saying.
I do have a question. First of all, I thank you for your presentation and for sharing with us your views from particularly this historical perspective of the development of libraries. And I understand there is a lot of legacy that has been over the years accumulated, and we oftentimes struggle very hard with this legacy. We struggle because it has so much baggage that we have to move forward with. And also sort of to follow up on what Colin said, that this also has something to do with the changing role of libraries and librarians. And there are changes that are ahead of us. We really don't have many options. We have to face these changes. We have to face these challenges ahead of us. And of course, as individual libraries, we're all at different stages. You know, we all move ahead with all different kinds of issues and some common issues. But also because of the local environment, because of the cultural implications and all of that, because it's difficult to say that we're all moving in this direction at the same pace. So my question is, if you look at all of that, and are you suggesting that we should approach and move ahead with these changes from sort of take a evolutionary kind of approach or a revolutionary kind of approach, mild versus radical, or some sort of middle ground?
Well, I'm a middle ground kind of a person, and I think what we often do when we're scared, and I think this is true of everyone, is that we do what we know how to do, we do more of it, and we do it more quickly, and we keep working at it. We're using a consultant at ARL to think about the future, and we're not using the word strategic planning. We're talking about strategic design. And one of the examples this person gave was fantastic. I don't know if you know this, at the end of the 19th century, there was something called a steamship. And the people who had sailboats, sailing ships, didn't like that. So they kept making their sailboats faster. And there's an example, and I decided not to bring it, of 5 iterations of the sailing ship. By the end, it's all sails. I mean, there's nothing, and it ultimately loses out to the steamship. So it seems to me what we need to do, if I were in charge, I would say, what is the goal? Because I think what we're doing is we are picking at parts of a problem and doing the best we can with those parts of the problem using the ways we've always thought about things. Instead of thinking about what are we trying to achieve. And we share a history of working in small institutions. And in smaller institutions, there seem to be ways to make the argument that a university is about the students and it's about research. And so if we think about those goals, instead of thinking about how perfectly we can do something, I think that's a beginning of a way to get away from the 19th century assumptions. Okay, I'm really good at collection management. I'm going to manage this collection to its death. But meanwhile, all this other stuff's happening out there. You might want to think about how does a student learn? How does a faculty member do research? And then see what role it is that we can best play. And then start to think about what we turn our talents to. That would be one way to think about. That's the way I would try to think about doing that. I'll give you one more example of this. We've heard about, the faculty don't want to move the books off campus. I have diffused that argument with humor. That's another thing we can do. I remember saying that we were thinking about that we already had off-site storage, something like that. We were moving to more off-site storage. And faculty member said, I never heard that, nobody said that. So we were in a consortium of 3 libraries, and all the books were all around. And I said, we have off-site storage. It's called Haverford and Swarthmore. And then all of a sudden, his assumptions changed, and he started to laugh, and he realized he was stuck in a wormhole too. So it seems to me some ways of just pointing out that, you know what, it's really not about where the stuff is, but you can get the stuff. And not saying that there's a hierarchy, that the faculty are on the top and the librarians are on the bottom. If we accept that, we're in trouble. It seems to me we have to be a little bit more assertive.
You asked us to think about what question to think of. I think working in this part of the world for a long time, my experience is we need to learn to ask bold questions because we are really expert in finding solutions a lot of the time. As a technical services colleague for many years, as a catalogist for many years, we are so well in finding solutions if we are being asked. But we're not too familiar to ask ourselves critical questions. So I would say tomorrow, if you're back to office, think of something that if you're not doing it anymore, or you can do it differently. And what is the difference? And what would make a difference in a 2 years' time? So it is very practical. Well, in actual context of the world, we will not probably talking about evolution or revolution, but move on, come on, things are changing. If you're not changing, you're not delivering the right service that are required of our new generation. So my question is to ask ourselves both questions.
And I would argue that we don't have that much time. I wouldn't. That would be the only change. I think not 2 years, maybe 2 weeks.
For me, I think the question is, what are the things that if we don't do, they will disappear? And we tend to think of the thing that we spend money to purchase are important because really, we know how much we spend on them, so we try to manage those kind of things. But really, the issue is that if we spend money to acquire all those commercial contents, they have commercial value. Somebody will manage them. They will exist because they have values. But when we spend so much money managing those things of commercial value really to the companies, we are not spending and paying attention to the thing that we create together, that the material we produce as an organization. These are the things that nobody will come and organize and manage and preserve for us. And if we don't get them, and get them now as they are being created because the digital media can disappear so fast, we are going to lose the opportunity to manage our uniqueness. And to me, we have been in the past spending too much time and energy managing other people's materials, managing other people's assets. And we really need to shift to look at what makes us unique and think of what we can do for ourselves that nobody else would do for us. And I contend these are our collective scholarly publications in any way, shape, or form. And if you're talking about learning outcomes, talking about what we produce students. They produce something unique that is a co-production between our faculties and students. And I really think we are not spending enough time and energy on the most important thing that make us what we are, that make us special.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think one of the reasons we don't do it is because it's harder. It's really harder than managing commercial. I used to buy alternative, radical, and underground press materials. And it was much easier to buy things with a 12-part form through a purchase order, and I had to pay people with cash. I had to get receipts. I had to put nickels and dimes in an envelope. That's a different world than the world of just, setting up our drawers so it works for the commercial world. I think it's a brilliant way of thinking about it. We have time for one more? One more. So who's going to be the last?
Steve O'Connor, and where Colin says he's of no fixed abode, of no fixed library. And in some ways, I think what you're talking about, Elliott, I was working with a small special library recently, and it was about to go out of existence, but we worked with the users in order to construct a variety of scenarios, and they've got a new future there. But I think what we're stuck in is the construct of a library, even the physical building of a library, and the physical construct of a collection, whether it's digital or print. And somehow it's a difficulty trying to get away from those constructs we've lived with and devised, protected within our profession. And I think it's a matter of getting outside them. When we talk about the individual role of a library or an individual library, really is there. And do we need those libraries? I mean, I think there are even more fundamental questions that should be raised in order to come up with more viable solutions. And because otherwise, I think when you're saying there's not enough time, I think you're right. I think the users are creating their own devices and their own constructs for the future.
In the word we use, in the word library, is the word book. And in our heads, even though we all know in this room that we have at least as much, if not more, use of our collections that isn't physical, we think of the library as that building across the street. And it's, so we're stuck in that, and everybody's stuck in that. And we all love books. Every person loves books. But it seems to me the middle ground is not either or. It's got to be both. And it seems to me it's got to be about uniqueness. That beautiful musical instrument we saw yesterday, that's the kind of thing that we need to collect and preserve, right? We may not need to collect and preserve certain kinds of cultural items. But you're absolutely right. We're stuck in a way of thinking, and we all are, and I'm stuck in it too. And the things that we learned how to do, we think we don't need to know anymore, or aren't valued anymore. And I would argue against that too. I think all of the expertise in this room could be slightly moved at an angle this way or that way to achieve a different goal. And I think it's possible for all of us to do that.
Yeah. I'll just leave you with two thoughts. One is just imagination. We don't let our imagination run wildly enough. And imagery. We're stuck in the imagery of libraries, books, tush guam, tush book, guam, the library, We can't break out and create a new imagery yet. And I think once we create that imagery, then we can start to look at the skills we want.
Well, let's do that together. That would be fun. Thank you very much.